I'm Dylan at Western Bikeworks, and this is our State Bicycles assembly video. State Bicycles out of Arizona. They make affordable, stylish, functional bicycles. We're proud to be a State Bicycle dealer. When you receive your State Bicycle, it will come unassembled. We highly recommend you take it to a bike shop to have it professionally assembled. But if you're not somewhere close to a bike shop, or if you have the proper tools and the knowledge to do it yourself, we're going to show you how to do that. First, let's look at the tools you're going to need. Scissors to get the protective packaging off the bicycle and its components. You're going to need hex wrenches. 4, 5, and 6 millimeter are the most common hex fasteners used on a bicycle. This incorporates all 3 of those sizes, the Part 3-way hex wrench. Also a set of hex bits in those same sizes to be used in conjunction with a torque wrench. If you don't know what a torque wrench is, it allows you to very accurately measure the amount of force you're using to tighten a fastener, which is going to be critical to safety, especially on those stem faceplate bolts, your seat posts, things that you don't want to slip and you also don't want to over tighten. Part Tool, Shimano, under their Pro line, they make torque wrenches, lots of available out there. So make sure you get a torque wrench. Also, a 10 millimeter wrench. Some of the State Bicycles have chain tensioners to properly tension the chain that needs a 10 millimeter box wrench. And then a pedal wrench. This is a long wrench, 15 millimeter box wrench that fits in between the crank arm and the pedal body to allow you to tighten and remove the pedals, but it can also be used on the axle nuts because those axle nuts are also 15 millimeter. Some multi-purpose bicycle grease. Part Tool, Phil Wood, lots of different manufacturers make grease. And then also a lock ring spanner. A lot of the State Bicycles are fixed gear, meaning that it has a fixed cog and then a lock ring on there. And they highly recommend, to prevent killing yourself, that before you ride that bicycle, you remove the lock ring, ensure that the cog is properly tightened, and then tighten that lock ring. So a lock ring spanner is going to be critical. We sell all of these tools at westernbikeworks.com. So first, let's get into the box. We have our owner's manual. Make sure you read that completely before you assemble your bicycle. It has some critical safety issues and things that you really need to make sure that you do before you get on that bicycle. First thing we're going to do to allow us to get the bike in the repair stand is we need to get the seat post and tighten the seat collar. So you do want to apply a pretty liberal amount of grease, and that's to prevent the seat post from seizing in the seat tube later on, especially if you live in environments that are a little wet. That steel frame can potentially corrode. So you just want to get that in there. After applying some grease, then get your hex wrench, and in most cases it's going to be a 4 millimeter. You're going to see a torque spec on there that says 7 Newton meters. If you don't know what that means, let us know from askus@westernbikeworks.com, but basically it's a measure of torque, and your torque wrench should have a setting that allows you to set it to 7 Newton meters. For right now though, we don't have to worry about torque. We're just going to snug that up so we can get it in the repair stand. You only want to clamp the bicycle by the seat post, never by the frame, because repair stands can put a lot of compressive force on the frame, and in some cases you can damage the frame. So only the seat post. Make sure you do that. Now we have to get all the protective packaging off of the frame.
Still up. Stay in there. Get high, y'all.
Alright, so we also want to take an inventory of the parts. We have encountered instances in which there are a couple parts, maybe a bolt or so, missing from the box. So make sure you take stock of all the components, and if you feel like something's missing, call our customer service staff. We'd be happy to help you out. The Contender, which is the model we're going to be assembling today, comes with 2 handlebar options, the bullhorn option and the flat bar option. Because there are many state and municipal laws that require that you use brakes on your bicycle, we're going to use the flat bar option, which has a front brake lever. It also includes a rear brake if you want that option. A lot of municipalities just require a front brake, but a rear brake is going to be much safer even if you're riding fixed gear. So let's start to get this thing together. First thing we're going to do is get the handlebars on. So we want to loosen the bolts on the stem faceplate. You'll see there are 2 bolts in this case. Some of their models have a 4-bolt faceplate. We're going to need our 456 hex wrench, and in this case it is a 5 millimeter hex. So we want to loosen those bolts keep track of those and remove the faceplate. Now we're going to install the handlebars. One thing to keep in mind with these removable faceplate stems is that when you tighten these bolts, you have to do so equally and incrementally, and even more importantly is the gap between the body of the stem and the faceplate has to be even on the top and the bottom. So if it seems like you have no gap at the top and then a huge gap at the bottom, that's not going to be very safe, because that says that there's unequal clamping force on that handlebar, which is not going to be ideal. So is what I like to do is kind of figure out where you want the bars in terms of their position. It's a little bit of personal preference. Take and you tighten this up, making sure they're centered, and then tighten the bottom one. And we're looking for an even gap between the faceplate and the stem, the top and the bottom bolts. So set up your bars how you'd like them arranged, and then snug them up equally and incrementally using the Park 3-way or some other hex key. And then when you start to feel some resistance is when we need to bust out the torque wrench. And the torque specs should be printed on the stem. In this case, 9 to 10 Newton meters. So what you want to do is wind your torque wrench up to, say, 9 Newton meters, lower end of that range, and equally and incrementally tighten these stem faceplate bolts. If you don't have access to a torque wrench, go to a local bike shop, because it is pretty important that you not over tighten or under tighten these. When the torque wrench goes click, that's when you stop rotating, and you know that's properly tightened, and then you wind that torque wrench back down. All right, the next step is going to be to attach the front brake. As I mentioned, there are lots of municipalities that require that you use a front brake at least on your bicycle. So we're going to make sure that we install that. There is a torque spec associated with this caliper mounting bolt as well. Varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. It's usually around 6 to 8 Newton meters, so make sure that you snug that up appropriately. Is what I'm going to do is just get it about finger tight, and then I'm going to install the front wheel, and then we can align the caliper a little bit better to the braking surface before we tighten that thing down to torque. So to install the front wheel, I mentioned before the axle nuts are 15 millimeters. So you can either use your pedal wrench, or you can use a 15 millimeter combo wrench or a box end wrench. So we're going to install the wheel, make sure that it is seated all the way in the dropouts. So we can back those axle nuts off. And if you want a convenient way to carry a tool, the Portland Design Works, they make a great tool called the 3 Wrencho, which has a 15 millimeter open end, or a box end wrench rather, and a tire lever as well. So it has a variety of purposes. You can also use it to spread peanut butter on your bagel. So we're going to just snug those up finger tight, get our 15 millimeter wrench, whether it's a pedal wrench or a box end, doesn't matter. We're going to snug that up. There is a torque spec associated with this. It's pretty high, so just crank down on them. You don't want to strip things out, but you also don't want the wheels to move. Once we've done that, we are going to align the brake pads with the braking surface. So we're going to loosen those pad mounting bolts and kind of get them roughly where we think they need to live. Just loosely snug those up. and I'll pull the brake lever and then use the tension on the cable to put the pads exactly where I want them, following the radius of the rim centered in the brake track so you know you're getting efficient braking. And do this to the other side here. And when I'm happy with the alignment of my pads, then I'm going to torque this caliper mounting bolt. So I'll snug it up by hand or with the three-way first, and then bust out my torque wrench. Like I said, around 6 to 8 Newton meters, but do check with the manufacturer to make sure you're getting it correct. All right. Next thing we want to do is adjust the headset and tighten these binder bolts here on the steerer. So the headset is the bearing assembly that the fork rotates on, and this little top cap here is actually the bearing adjustment. So what you want to do before you make any kind of bearing adjustment is you want to make sure that these two binder bolts are loose, because if they're tight, you're not going to be making an adjustment to the headset. So make sure those are loose, and then you're going to take your 4mm and snug this up. And what you're looking for is that the bar still rotates smoothly, but that there's no knocking. And we're actually going to make a final adjustment when we have the bike together on the ground. It's a lot easier to check to make sure that things are properly adjusted. So I'm not going to tighten these binder bolts just yet. Next thing we're going to do is attach the pedals. All bicycles, the right-hand pedal or the drive side pedal is a right-hand thread, which means righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. All non-drive or left pedals are left-hand thread, which means that you turn it to the left or counterclockwise to tighten them. So you need to make sure that you get the correct pedal. The orientation of these toe clips tells you whether it's a right or a left. You can also look at the threads. If the threads slope off to the right, it's your drive side or right pedal. If they slope off to the left, it's your non-drive or your left pedal. We also want to grease the pedal threads. So that you can get them off later if you have to ship your bike or you get a new set of pedals. And thread them in by hand till they're finger tight. And remember, the left-hand pedal is a left-hand thread, so you're going to turn that actually counterclockwise in order to install it. If that seems a little bit confusing, one of the little mnemonic or kind of memory devices that came up with when I was first working on bikes is if you want to go forward to install the pedals, stand forward at the front of the bike and push down on the wrench. So I would stand at the front of the bike and push down, whether I'm working on the drive or the non-drive side, doesn't matter, you're going to tighten those pedals. So let's get those snugged up with our pedal wrench. They do need to be fairly snug, but you don't want to strip things out. I usually choke up on the pedal wrench about halfway and snug it up pretty well. And then the non-drive pedal. Alright, so the pedals are installed. Next thing we want to do is make sure that this lock ring is properly tightened. So I'm going to loosen the axle nuts for the back wheel using our 15mm wrench. Remove the rear wheel. And using our lock ring spanner, you want to remove that lock ring, and this is also a left-hand thread. So you want to turn it clockwise in order to loosen it. So we're going to loosen that, tighten the cog, and then tighten that lock ring back up, and it's going to tighten to the left or counterclockwise. So in the interest of saving time, I'm not going to do that right now, but do be aware that this is something that you really have to check. That's why they have a little warning label right there, pretty explicit. Once we do that, reinstall the wheel. And you need to appropriately tension the chain. Lots of different ways to tension the chain. There are resources like Sheldon Brown online that can kind of walk you through that. But in essence, what we're trying to do is to prevent the chain from sagging significantly. This is a little loose right now. We're going to have to tighten that up. But especially with fixed gear bicycles, because the chain is the means by which you slow the bicycle down, the rear wheel, you don't want that chain falling off, so you do need proper tension. This is a little bit loose, so I'm going to tighten this up a little bit. That's much better, about a ½ inch of deflection if you push down on the chain kind of halfway through its span. And make sure that the wheel is centered, and then you want to make sure that these are snug. You do not want the wheel to slip forward under power. That's a huge safety issue. Wheel installed, pedals installed, brake installed. We're going to fine-tune the position of the control lever. So I'm actually going to do that with the bicycle on the ground. Loosen the clamp for the brake lever, rotate it to the desired position, usually about 45 degrees, so it's easy to access. Snug that up. Sometimes a torque spec printed on that clamp. And as I mentioned before, now we need to make sure that this bearing adjustment, the headset, is properly adjusted. So what I'm going to do is grab the front brake and rock the bicycle back and forth. Do it at a 90 degrees and this way as well. And what I'm feeling for is any kind of knocking sensation. If there's a knocking sensation, you need to tighten this adjustment here. Once everything is adjusted, you want to make sure that the stem is aligned to the front wheel. And now we're going to tighten these binder bolts. We have 2 bolts, so we have to sequence them. We have to do things equally and incrementally. So I'll get this top one about finger tight, then go to the other one, get that about finger tight, and then start going back and forth, tightening those up a little bit. And then we're going to look at the torque spec. It says right here 9 to 10 Newton meters, so the same as we had for the stem faceplate. So wind the torque wrench up. 9 Newton meters. Sequence those appropriately. And when you hear the wrench go click, you know things are properly tightened. Last thing we want to do is set the seat height. So you can get the bike on the ground, measure your seat height, and tighten that seat collar to the appropriate torque spec, in this case 7 Newton meters, ready to ride. Have any questions? Give us a call or visit us at westernbikeworks.com.